One of the nice things about going home for New Year's is that I get to watch terrestrial television again. The problem with streaming services is sometimes having your pick of 20,000 different programs means you can't decide on any single one of them. The nice thing about old-fashioned TV channels, even with their adverts for conservatories and pension lotteries, is sometimes it's just nice to have that choice taken away from you. To settle back and see what god-awful game shows are making arounds, or find out who the hell that ITV celebrity my mum has been going on about actually is. But it also means at the end of 2022, while I was nursing an almighty hangover, I was able to catch a repeat of the last episode of Columbo. Called Columbo Likes the Nightlife, it is part of the slightly off-the-wall 10th season of Columbo. Although the show became iconic during the 70s, this final series constitutes a collection of specials that were released between 1990 and 2003. In this episode, Columbo is investigating a nightclub owner who is covering for the accidental murder of his girlfriend Vanessa's ex-husband. As with a lot of classic Columbo, the investigation ends with Columbo forcing the villainous nightclub owner Justin and his girlfriend to admit to their crime with a surprise piece of last-minute evidence. It's not the greatest episode in the world. The plot is fine, but the detective himself feels anachronistic. It's not just the ravers or the halter-tops. The episode makes the show look like every other early 2000s detective procedural. Steve Sharippa from The Sopranos makes an appearance as the mob connection of Vanessa's ex-husband, and the final twist is made with a piece of high-tech, forensic machinery that feels plucked straight out of CSI. But the worst bit might just be seeing Peter Falk. His shaggy hair turned grey, and we still has his marvellously ill-fitting suit. Instead of raggedy, he just looks kind of uncomfortable. And he's made to stand there in the too clean, too bright light of a digital camera. It's disconcerting, in that way that only the realisation that time does indeed pass can do to you. Because Columbo isn't like every other detective show. In fact, for me, the reason I came to it so late was because I didn't think a show like that could work. A detective show where we could find out who the killer was in the opening act? How is that supposed to sustain you for 60 to 90 minutes? I mean, sure, don't get me wrong, it can work in a movie. Hitchcock's Rope opens with an audience knowing exactly who killed who and how they did it. But that's a movie. It can be driven by other factors, by great performances or with an emphasis on tension rather than the whodunit. But this is a police procedural, right? It's not meant to work like that. I grew up on these things. Diagnosis Murder, A Touch of Frost, Jonathan Creek. These were my favourite things in the world growing up. In fact, during one of my many embarrassing episodes of my life, I went through a phase of trying to dress like Jonathan Creek. I actually spent one of my first paychecks when I was a teenager working in Sainsbury's on a coat that I thought looked like his. You know, the one, the duffel coat with the wooden toggles? I didn't even have curly hair, it was ridiculous. But save for some residual memories and osmosis, I never got into Columbo. Why would I? I wanted the hit that all crime and detective shows are meant to give you. You know the one I mean. It's the Agatha Christie moment. The Sherlock Holmes reveal. Everyone gathered in the drawing room. Come closer, Watson, and I will present unto you the murderer. Where Angela Lansbury finally figures it out, or Hugh Laurie makes that little face of his. So why would I watch Columbo? How would that work? I mean, I wasn't an idiot. I could hazard a guess. I figured there was something in the cat and mouse chase, of a criminal trying to lie their way out of a bad situation, the jaws of justice slowly creeping in around them. But what I found was something much more than that. Something which, dare I say it, put it in more of a league with Rope than it does Jonathan Creek. And that hit?
Woohoo! Big time, yeah.
So, in the spirit of sharing that feeling with you, I'm going to take an episode and break down how it works. And how it makes a story where you already know the ending feel as riveting as any Sherlock Holmes or Miss Marple tale you can hope to find. The episode I've picked is called The Most Dangerous Match, which comes in at the end of Season 2. The reason I picked this episode was simply because it was the one I was watching when I had the idea to write the script. But I also like the idea of talking about an episode that doesn't have a really big guest star in it either. It means we can talk about how even the less flashy episodes are able to pull off this beautiful dramatic trick. Although I am going to be talking about some of my favourite episodes along the way, which do feature the big names. But just in general, I think it's a good way in. A lot of people get into Columbo in part, I think, because of the promise of the guest stars, of seeing William Shatner's name in the opening credits and rubbing your hands with glee. But on the off chance that this is your gateway into Columbo, I'm going to introduce you to one that will keep these little nice surprises hidden for you. But I will warn you, I'm about to spoil this episode entirely. This is Season 2, Episode 7. This is your last chance to pause and go watch it yourself if you fancy doing so. Okay, good, right. So the premise of this episode is pretty simple. The former #1 chess player in the world, Tomin Dudek, has come out of retirement to challenge Emmett Clayton, the current #1 chess player. Dudek is played by Jack Krushkun, and Clayton by Lawrence Harvey, who is in the original film adaptation of The Manchurian Candidate. It is Clayton we meet first, in his dreams. He looks awful. He stood in a gigantic chessboard, obviously in the middle of a panic attack. The pieces are moving around him, putting him in check. He's curled up on the floor as a gigantic figure towers over him. Dressed in an angelic military uniform, he is a well-decorated general, commanding his chess pieces, with the biggest, warmest smile you ever seen on a man. And Clayton is scared to death of him. This is the first thing that makes Columbo so special. Poor Verhoeven, not that one, which I say not to make you feel bad for thinking so, but because I made the same mistake, talked about this really well in his Guardian article last year, and about his first forays into the show. It feels like TV trying to embrace the experimentation of film. You may have already heard that the pilot episode of Columbo was directed by a young Steven Spielberg, and the show feels directed. It's clear, especially in these early seasons, that the directors have been allowed to play with the form in their episodes. They make clear, dramatic decisions not just with the writing, but with the camera as well. Ironically or not, depending on your opinions of Spielberg, I think it's actually in the second ever episode that you can really see this. Look at this. Let me just set this clip up for you a little bit. This episode is called Death Lends a Hand, and this is Robert Culp playing Carl Brimmer. He's a private detective who has just killed a cheating spouse he was following after she refuses to be blackmailed. And now watch what happens as he realises he will need to cover up the murder. I remember jumping out my seat when I first saw that. I felt cheated by all those years of pale and dry detective shows. You know, it's like the first time you watch Twin Peaks and you see Andy crying by the dead body of Laura Palmer, a police officer actually affected by a death, instead of treating it with the bored expression of professional. You want to slap yourself in the head and go, of course, why isn't everyone doing this? Columbo is a real product of 70s cinema. The show has ties not just to Spielberg, but with the likes of John Cassavetes and Elaine May as well. I'll talk about Peter Falk more in a bit, but I think a lot of people forget that he has a truly inspirational film acting career, as well as being the iconic LA detective. And at its best, Columbo feels like a gritty, textured, 70s new wave picture. You'll get what I mean in a minute, but back to the opening. We see that Clayton is scared of this Mario-looking guy, but before we have time to figure anything out, Clayton is awake, and we get to see what this scared man pretends to be in his day-to-day life. Clayton, as I said, is the current chess world champion. He is also an arrogant and vainglorious world chess champion. We see him strut around the hotel, we see him meet with the press about an upcoming match. The show is making several things clear to us. That Clayton is famous, rich, and most importantly, a snob. Next, we see through Clayton's eyes another man, Dudek. And what do you know, it's the cheery-looking guy who was scaring him to death in his dreams. However, rather than a terrifying figure, Dudek is contrasted with Clayton as warm, softly spoken, and even a little self-deprecating. It becomes clear that the reason the reporters are flocking around this hotel is that Clayton is the current chess champion not because he beat Dudek, but because Dudek had to stand down due to poor health. But Dudek is on the mend, and is given into pressure from his family to participate in an exhibition match with Clayton. But before we go on, I want to quickly pause to talk about something else. One of the things that really differentiates Columbo here is in the detail of this opening, particularly to the smaller characters. Look at this reporter here. He won't reappear in the episode. But look at him as he sizes Clayton up, notice his weak spot, and take advantage to needle him. Compare him to the background characters of something like CSI. They're big, they're broad, they're cartoons there to express simple emotions or exposition. But there's a texture to Columbo. The show is filled with secretaries, assistants, police officers, other detectives, and they all feel different and individual. It feels like they're given the importance of a character in a movie, even though we never see them again. This builds into the relationship Columbo has to the 70s world of LA. The villains in Columbo are always high-status individuals. And oh god, do I really want to finish this point because it's the best thing about the show, but I just need to finish setting up the episode first. So Clayton and Dudek are in the same hotel, and it is the night before their exhibition game. Clayton is clearly obsessed with Dudek, and decides to follow him when he notices Dudek heading out to a restaurant. The first thing we notice about this restaurant is the checkered table cover. Of course, just like a chessboard. And what's more, these two are already in the middle of a game, both literally and figuratively. As soon as Clayton sniffs out that Dudek has actually been coming back and forth all day to the restaurant, waiting for Clayton to notice and follow him, the two enthusiasts are playing a game with the condiments in front of them. The game builds quickly, the two of them analysing each other's game. Clayton is clearly not doing as well as he'd like. He's not as petrified as he was in the dream, but he's not far behind. What's brilliant here is we are allowed to empathise with Clayton. It's integral to how these episodes work. A part of us throughout will want Clayton to get away with it. It's only natural when we are paired so tightly to a protagonist, when we see their fears, their anxieties, when we see what they see. But it's also clear that Clayton and Dudek are getting on. They both love the same thing, chess. They return to the hotel, Clayton helping Dudek with sneaking back in so that he can dodge his niece. He's not to be going out and eating such rich food when he's technically still meant to be recovering. But it's also here that we see the eventual murder weapon. We see the trash compactor, and our pulse quickens. But it is only whetting our appetite. Smash cut to Clayton. He is telling Dudek's entourage that he hasn't seen Dudek. But it's only a lovely piece of misdirection. Murder isn't in the air yet, but it's not far off. Dudek and Clayton have relocated their chess game to Clayton's room, on a proper board this time, but it's still not going well. Dudek wins. It's such a clear win that Dudek moves Clayton's pieces for him. He didn't just win, he won 3 or 4 moves ago, and Clayton didn't even notice. It's actually one of the first times we get a sense that Dudek might not be that all of a great of a person either. He's almost gloating in his win, and you can sense that touching another player's pieces might not be the kindest thing to do in a chess game. Rarely are the people killed helpless victims. They are usually actually of the same stock as the villain. A lot of them are killed because they're trying to blackmail or expose someone. It makes it again feel like Columbo is stepping into a different world to us mere mortals. I'm stretching the metaphor here, but it's like those stories of Greek gods who spent their free time lying, cheating and betraying one another. But I'm getting distracted. The point is, this is it. Clayton has made his decision. The thing to remember is they are here for an exhibition game, one that Clayton now thinks he will lose. But they aren't playing for the crown. Clayton wouldn't lose his title if he lost to Dudek. This is one of the things that makes Columbo so beautiful. The unkempt, ramshackle little man coming in to take these villains down. It's why there are bronze statues of him. It's why he's our working class hero. Clayton, like all Columbo villains, kills not out of desperation. He's not an addict, killing for a fix. He's not a single parent, stealing to pay for rent, or an ex-con who knows no other way. He's a rich, famous, high-status man who's about to kill because he doesn't want to lose something he could easily live without. Let's quickly switch to another episode. Season 3's Any Port in a Storm. This one does have a recognisable special guest, Donald Pleasant. And just look at how handsome he is.
Color like this was born 100 years ago in Italy. Suffered through decades of the Piemonte winter. Survived a steerage ocean voyage to America and lived to bloom afresh under the rich Californian sun. Drink, gentlemen. It tastes as good as it looks.
Pleasant plays a wine collector called Adrian Carsini, who's about to lose the family vineyard. Maybe a justifiable motivation, but the show makes several things very clear. It was Adrian who spent all the vineyard's money collecting wines he doesn't even drink. And the selling of the vineyard will make Adrian comfortable for the rest of his life. Like Clayton, the only thing he stands to lose is a slight bit of status. So he can't say stuff like this to his equally stuck-up friends.
Pay a lot of money for it.
The cost would be prohibitive. I'd rather serve it to my friends and watch their faces than sell it to some Texan bumpkin who'll stick it in the freezer and bring it out with a homemade chili.
Clayton is about to kill because, in part, he thinks he is above the law. He thinks his whims are more important than other people. It's not even about killing Dudek. He has to project his failures onto him. He fakes Dudek running off back to his home country, even tricking Dudek into writing a John Deere letter which could easily be read as him forfeiting the match. And then he throws his body into the rubbish. And then here comes our boy. Each arrival of Columbo is magical. There's a reason he's so iconic. His Mac, his disgusting looking stoogie, and a look on his face like he's just woke up. 9 times out of 10, Columbo will pull up to a scene in his own Peugeot 403 and not even be recognised as a cop. Security guards stop him, people ignore him. Even when they're expecting a detective, it's not Columbo they're picturing. He isn't a neo-noir hero. He isn't a troubled genius. He's a happily married man who's turning up for another day at his job. Here we see Columbo introduced, right after this deadly chess match, playing checkers, and losing. It's a great gag, but it's still telling us several things. Columbo, among other things, is humble. He's not quite an everyman. He's a detective machine, and like his nameless dog, when he gets the sense of murder, he doesn't let go. There is something of the common man about him. I mean, look at his suit. It's not even grey, it's off grey. His shirt looks like it's been washed in that puddle of yellow liquid you find at the bottom of overused ashtrays. Oftentimes, Columbo will be introduced on the back foot. He's always missing a clean shave, but sometimes he's also nursing a hangover, or he's getting over a cold. Maybe he's waiting to find out the most recent baseball scores, or he's been up all night on the previous day's case. Again, it's never anything big. This isn't Sherlock's drug addiction, McNulty's sex addiction. He's just woke up on the wrong side of bed. In the context of our murderers, it solidifies a couple of things. One is that Columbo doesn't belong here. In this first-class hotel room, in this mansion, in these candidates' headquarters, whatever it is. The second is that his Mac and his Stoogie aren't just for show. He's an eyesore. His presence offends everyone around him. He's not of their station. At first, he's a nuisance, but when he first starts asking his questions, seeing how much weight their alibi holds, more often the villains aren't worried, they're just annoyed. Annoyed that their best-laid murder plan is being wasted on this little idiot. But then, as the episode goes on, Columbo lets them piece together that he knows more than they'd like. His uncombed hair, his cigar. It all becomes a bigger and bigger thorn in their side. They look through a crowd, panicked because they know they've forgotten something. And who do they see? Standing out from the blue bloods and the executives? An unassuming Columbo. This is the beauty of the show. This is what makes watching it so tantalizing. You don't want to see the murderer caught or put in front of a judge. No, screw that. We want to see them learn that they aren't the smartest person in the room. That they weren't better than anyone else around them. They need to learn that all their money or fame or inherited wine collections do not make them better than anyone else. Columbo arrives at the hotel and quickly picks up on the inconsistencies on Clayton's story. The show is good at keeping Columbo's ferocity at bay, if only for a little bit, especially when the murder isn't quite so clear. So you can watch him as he picks up some small inconsistency. A bathtub that's wet before an exercising man leaves the gym. A car that's been left in the rain but doesn't have watermarks. The way it handles this evidence is always so great too. The show won't tell you what it is up front, but it will keep you on a short leash. It does it so you can usually figure out yourself as it's being revealed, and there is a real joy in seeing Columbo look at a prepared crime scene, and the audience catching at the same time him noticing a contradiction in plain sight. And this is the show taking advantage of us already knowing the murderer. It means we can follow the evidence just as well as Columbo does. He becomes our viewer surrogate. It's part of why Columbo's methods feel just right as well. Columbo doesn't always play by the book, you see. He's willing to lie, cheat, and even steal to get his villains to slip up and admit to something that contradicts their story. Again, it's because he isn't to get them behind bars. He's there to prove to them that they aren't as smart as they think they are. is why there's a real pleasure in the confrontations between Columbo and his villains. There is almost a parallel between Columbo and someone like Thomas Harris's Will Graham, who is able to think like a criminal. You watch Columbo as he plays with the villains' words, with their frustrations and their emotions. He almost knows how they think, how they might have done it. There's a reason the pop culture representation of Columbo is the one more thing guy. I can't do a good impression, I'm sorry. He lets them talk, lets them slip up, and you're right there with him. You catch the slip-ups, the tiny, small inconsistencies, just as he does. All at once, he's flipped your allegiance from the murderer to the detective. It's the gift of having an actor like Peter Falk in the role. One of my favourite movies is Elaine May's 1976 film Mikey and Nicky, which stars Peter Falk opposite John Cassavetes. Although written and directed by May, the film is full of the two actors ad-libbing and making up their characters as they go along. Cassavetes and Falk have this natural elegance to their improvisation. They make small things seem important, and Falk brings this to Columbo. Although originally conceived by Richard Levinson and William Link, Falk formed a lot of the character himself. Not only is the Mac and the off-grey suit from his own wardrobe, but Falk ad-libbed a lot of the smaller dialogue, along with his iconic mannerisms himself. It means when he pretends to be stumped, even though he does it in every episode, you believe him. It never becomes caricature. This is put up against the villains, who are likewise usually perfectly cast. They can feel interchangeable at times, but there are always small nuances between them. Although yes, all of them are high status in one way or another, they each have their own tells. Returning to Donald Pleasant, his Adrian is smart and calm under pressure, but he doesn't know how to fake emotions.
Well, of course, I'm saddened by his death. One doesn't lose a brother and remain emotionless.
Vera Miles in Lovely But Lethal plays a great liar, but her murder was a rushed crime of opportunity and is only one step ahead of Columbo. John Cassavetes has a perfect crime, but his brimming anger and frustration is only matched by how much Columbo annoys the hell out of him. Clayton's tale comes from not his inability to lie, but from his inability to keep his insecurity in check. He will show us that he is a smart man. He has a perfect memory, remembering every move that he and Dudek played. He plays 15 players at once and is even able to hold a room with genuine charisma. But the idea that he lost, that he isn't the best, is killing him. Columbo and Clayton go back and forward. They also have their own game of mental chess. Columbo knows he's an irritant, and he will make sure he's around whenever the killer thinks they're in the clear. But how does Columbo beat him? It's a small detail that, once unlocked, shows you others. Some of the clues the audience aren't expected to get, like that Clayton packed the wrong toothbrush for Dudek when he faked his runaway. But others are there for us to notice as soon as Columbo does. For instance, why does Dudek use his own pen and envelope to write his farewell letter, but not his own letterhead? Columbo, once he gets hold of this, turns into his little devil. He will needle, annoy, and get in the way. He'll become everything that annoys the hoi polloi. They'll treat him like a servant who's got out of hand. It's why it doesn't really matter that Columbo only ever comes up with circumstantial evidence. In this instance, the nail in the coffin has been staring at us the whole time. Clayton uses a hearing aid, and in certain instances he turns it off. As such, he isn't able to tell when the noisy trash compactor is on or off. He throws Dudek down the chute, but the machine has an auto shut-off that activates whenever anything unexpected comes down it. But this is only noticeable if you can hear the thing. Columbo and the audience are left with a question. What sort of person would throw Dudek down the chute, but not notice the machine was off? For all his mental agility, Clayton hasn't thought about something that every janitor in the building already knows. But Columbo isn't done. Like I said, prison isn't his goal, it's humility. And what does he do with Clayton? Well, let me show you.
You're absurd.
Excuse me, Mr. Clayton, sir. Could you...
Certainly.
About your pen?
Sir?
Thank you, Mr. Clayton. Thank you. About your pen, do you remember when you left it in the hospital on the seat and I came running after you to return it?
Check.
Well, I took the liberty.
New game.
Yes, sir. I took the liberty before I ran after you with the pen to scribble with it on some paper.
Well, that's very clever of you, Lieutenant.
The boy down there at the lab, he tells me it's definitely the same ink and possibly the very same pen that Mr. Dudek used to write his farewell note with.
Innuendo, insinuation, circumstantial trivia.
That could be true, sir, but if you put it all together, maybe the grand jury will feel differently.
Do you really think that the finest chess player in the world would make even half the mistakes that you ascribe to me?
Mr. Clayton, sir? I'm afraid that's check and mate, sir.
What?
Forces him to lose, to accept the truth. And it's this face. See it there? That's the face. It's not even a smile. It's just a look. And I got you. The episodes always end thereabouts the same way. Not with an arrest. Most of the time, not even with a confession. It is with reluctant, pained acquiescence. Part of it is relief. Columbo has been running them ragged, but it's also acceptance. They didn't execute the perfect crime or the perfect alibi. They're not above the rest of us. And oh God, what a hit that is to see. Thank you for listening to that one. I went ahead and bought a new mic since that last recording because it was really annoying me. So I hope this has been a bit better. And I hope you enjoyed the episode. Thank you for listening to me. Just sort of twaddle on. Yeah, if you could like and subscribe, anything you can do to just help me at this point would be really great. Really appreciated. Yeah, cheers. See you next time.